6 hours ago, we had another round in the Asian Pacific area, and the three of us with the blue-white background got up early, as you can imagine, and we had a quite interesting discussion going on. I hope the same will be true right now. And we had a fantastic input by Jerome Kim from the International Vaccine Institute, bringing into play the medical point of view with the COVID-19 pandemic situation and education. Just to mention this. So the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Professor Professor Kleiner. My panelists are Professor Nana Abba Appiah, who is the Vice Chancellor, Academic and Student Affairs, University of Ghana. Would you identify yourself?
I am here. Hello, everyone.
Yes. Then we have Dr. Narimane Hadj-Hamou.
Yes, hello, that's me.
Yes. We have Professor Aloys Krieg, who is Vice-Rector for teaching at Aachen University in Germany.
Hello, that's me. Greetings from Aachen.
Okay. So Professor Wayne Morgan is a former Vice President of Education, University of Sheffield, where I studied my PhD.
Ah, right. Oh, hello. Well, Sheffield. Hi.
Hi. Yes. I want to ask a general question for everybody, starting with Professor Wayne. What are the lessons from the pandemic that you think will change education forever, higher education?
Okay, thank you. And it's great to be here as part of the panel. Thank you. I think there are a huge number of lessons that we can learn as educators, whether that's at an institutional or a regional level, as we're talking about. I think many of them are lessons that are hard learned because we've had to work very quickly and in ways that perhaps are not always familiar for us. We've had to work and get solutions in a very quick time frame. Sometimes we would like to consider these things more and think more about them and the implications, but we've had to move very, very quickly so that we can operate as institutions, but also that we can support our students at a time when it's been very frightening for them, very difficult for them. So I think that the lessons we've had have been around some of the good things that have come out of it, but also some of the things that have been a problem for us. I think some of the good things have been the way that colleagues have worked together, worked very efficiently and very effectively in teams to actually provide online learning in a very short space of time. I think some of the challenges that we've had to overcome and that we won't go back towards the normal are around some of our processes and procedures. And I think they have fundamentally changed as a consequence of COVID. Some of the ways in which we design our programs, some of the ways in which we assess our programs, and some of the ways in which we try and build community with students in a non-face-to-face environment. I think those have been some of the biggest lessons that we've learned and that will inform what we do as we go through into a world of post-COVID, if you like. And I think those are the things that we mustn't lose. I think one of the biggest challenges we face is people saying, oh, when we return to how it was. And what we mustn't do is return to how it was. I think there is so much that we have learned that's positive from this that we must maintain that.
Professor Krieg, those lessons that will not change higher education forever.
So I think, in my opinion, the future will bring us a simultaneous offer of face-to-face learning in presence and also of digital learnings. The students may have the choice between both of them. This is important for us since we have a more heterogeneous kind of students. Since we have students who are working, for instance, and they cannot go to lectures over the day, or they have got children and they do not find the time. And this will allow us to individualize the kind of teaching at a huge university. And I think this will help us in the future. And the other thing which is important is remote exams. That we, at the moment, we try to offer remote exams, but the biggest challenge there is data protection, that we can offer things which meet the data protection rules in our country. But this will be done in the future. For instance, I had to offer a lecture where we had two students, one from China, one from Bulgaria, who were not able to attend the final exam, which was on campus. And there was one student who was allowed to leave home. And all the three could take the exam under the same conditions as the students in our lecture hall. This is an advantage, and I think this will go on also after the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. Dr. Hadj-Hamou, same question.
Yes, a very good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, to everyone. I think that I'm not going to say much more than what my colleagues have actually already mentioned. I think that one of the greatest lessons that we've learned is really about making sure that as universities, we learn about how to better use technology to engage students, to create exciting learning opportunities, to expand learning opportunities as well. I think that in many parts of the world, there is heavy investment that are made in technology, but very little return on investment. And I think one lesson we've learned is really to capitalize on the technology investments that we're doing within institutions. The second lesson that I think is actually important for the sector is that we found ways to work in smarter means. There's lots of institutional university operations that we were able to move remotely without dramatically, impacting the efficiency of those processes. We see much more collaboration happening online and remotely. We see much more conferences and events and research collaborative projects happening. So I think that after the pandemic or the COVID, there will be lots of practices in terms of doing remote things that will continue. The third element, I think, which is important, is that institutions should have strategies to continuously develop capacity among faculty member and teaching skill. Skilling and upskilling is an important element. And we'll see there have been different levels of maturity to which institutions has responded to COVID. Lots of thinking around, how to engage students in an online environment, how to design assessment that is suitable to online learning. And very often, what faculty have been trying to do is to replicate the traditional face-to-face approach in an online environment, not taking into consideration that online has its particularity, and we might need to think outside of the box and not be afraid of change. So being more agile and more resilient, open to change, is something that I think is a hard lesson that COVID has taught us.
Are you waiting for the new norm, for the old way we used to do things?
I don't think that we will go back to the same things we used to do. And, I think that blended learning, online learning is something that, will continue even beyond the pandemic. I think looking at, innovative ways for engaging talent and faculty members would be something that universities will consider. Remote collaborations is something also that might look. So I don't think that, we will be going, for most of us, to the old practices before COVID. And if we did, that means that we haven't learned anything.
Thanks. Professor Nana Amfo.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good day to everyone. I think that I do agree with what my colleagues have said earlier on, but I would like to add that for me, one of the biggest lessons is that collaboration may serve us better than competition, because we have seen through this process that our needs are basically the same across board. For us on this part of the world, the issues that we had to deal with, access, content development, issues of assessment, generally delivery of online education, and support for students and faculty. Yes, a single institution can try to do all of these on its own, but I think it's better when we collaborate with others and work towards achieving these. We pull together our strengths and we share these across for our mutual benefits. And the other big lesson for me is the need for us to get the appropriate IT infrastructure in place if we don't have them. And then when we have them, to the uptake of these. For instance, here at the University of Ghana, we'd had a learning management system in place since 2014. We had tried to train faculty, but it was until the pandemic struck that people realized the need to take these things seriously. And then when the pandemic struck and we had to do online training, the numbers, increased tremendously. And then people then began to use these things that we've had around for a number of years. They began to use them more effectively. And I think that generally the pandemic is pushing us to be more prepared and to train our students for the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I go back to Professor Wayne, and the question I want to ask is there an end game in mind in terms of digital learning?
I think I would pick up what Aloys said earlier in terms of the offer that universities have. I don't think it's a case of thinking that the end game is everything is digital. I think what we need to think about is how do we best serve the young, the student generation, etc., that we want to engage with. And that requires us to be flexible in the way that we do that. I think that the end game is about a spectrum of offer. And it is around thinking about how the digital helps us deliver that in a most efficient and effective and engaging way. Because you can do things efficiently, but if it's not engaging, the students won't want to know. So I think what we have to think about is how do we support students whilst they're studying, but also how do we support students in a lifelong environment as well? Because what we have to think about is that this is not just a short burst of learning. We need to think about the students being lifelong learners, and what they might experience is coming back for short bursts of learning, short bursts of activity. Now that is much more easily supported if we have a very sophisticated and thought through digital offer alongside a face-to-face. I think there will always be a demand for face-to-face learning, and there should be, and there should still be an offer of that, but lots of students can't engage in that. So we need to think about how do we offer that range of ways of engaging that meets a face-to-face need, meets a digital, an online need, but meets an ongoing need for lifelong learning. And I think that's where we're heading, to be a much more rich environment that we offer those different modalities for students, wherever they're learning and however they want to learn. That's how I would see the end game.
We are not too, are we too far away from a global virtual learning university?
Well, yeah, this is where we get into this whole issue of competition and, the models of how universities operate and the ways in which they're set up, particularly in their local jurisdictions. I'm a great believer in collaboration and sharing and working together. Some of the work I did previously around open educational resources, I thought was hugely important. Just sharing materials in ways that, frankly, we could spend all our time reinventing the same wheel. We don't want to be doing that, but we need to understand that we do offer things differently. But I do think that there's a lot more that could be done in a collaborative form, particularly in that digital environment. For years, we've used each other's textbooks. So why shouldn't we use each other's digital resources? What's the difference? And I think it's a mindset sometimes that we need to get through.
Professor Krieg, do you agree or disagree with Professor Wayne?
So I fully agree with Wynne that we will have digital elements in the future, in particular for lifelong learning, that is not always possible to go to face-to-face lectures on the campus. But there are also certain things which can only be taught on campus. For instance, all the lab work in our engineering faculties. It's necessary that they go to lab and they do work hands-on. But this will be one part, of course. And I agree with you that we should collaborate with each other. One thing, for instance, if I see the challenges for teaching for the next 10 years, one thing will be digitalization, that we will offer material in a digital form, that we also provide students with knowledge about data, about big data. And the second perspective will be internationalization. If you have a look at the labor market, the labor market requires that lots of students go abroad, at least for a certain period. And one thing which does not cover all the things of international exchange is that we have our partner universities, that we can open our digital formats to the students of our partner universities, and that our students can also attend digital formats of our partner universities. This will give them an impression how things work in a different setting in other countries. They are not the same as at home. And this could be one step for the future for the benefit of all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Dr. Hadj-Hamou, your comments on these two questions.
Yes, what I would like to say in terms of the end goal of digital transformation is that that might really be different from one institution to another and from one context to another, really depending on the level of maturity of digital transformation that has already happened in the institution and in the country where you are. So that's one first starting point. And I don't think that digital transformation means that we will all be doing online 100%. But I think that even traditional face-to-face institutions that will decide to continue with the face-to-face approach because of the nature of the discipline, like nobody's basically going to teach medical sciences or dentistry online. So even having said that, there is room to actually capitalize on digital technologies in terms of the learning experience, in terms of improving, access, in terms of basically providing flexibility, in terms of getting data and so forth. What I personally would think that is important for institutions is really to look at their differentiation and how every institution, what is its mission statement and what does it aim to do? And based on that, actually design and develop a robust digital ecosystem that would look holistically at the student experience and that would engage different stakeholders. So what you feel is happening in many places with digital transformation, it's like bits and pieces being done. And we haven't been seeing a lot of holistic thinking about digital transformation and its impact, not just on teaching and learning, but on all the, all what universities are doing. I think that after the pandemic, universities will play a very important role in restoring economic vibrancy through maybe skilling and upskilling displaced workers and adapting to the changing workforce need. And this is why we might see an emergence of micro-credentials and less formal pathways of learning. And I think that as institutions, we need to think about all of this. We need to engage with external stakeholders. We need to be agile and resilient and responsive. So that's.
Professor Nana, the same issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I didn't actually hear your question, but I suppose it has to do with the end.
The question is that, is there an end goal in mind in terms of digital learning?
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, so, well, I think that what's eventually going to happen is that we are going to be open to options. It's not as if everything has to end in the face-to-face mode that we have now. It's great, for instance, that we are having this meeting this way, but certainly there's some aspects that I do miss during the coffee break, when I'll take a cup of coffee and have that small chit chat with a participant. I miss that. We are missing that. But at the same time, the digital option has afforded us the opportunity for things to continue even in the context of the pandemic. So we are getting things done. And this is what we will continue to do. But I think that the face-to-face option should also be available so that we can do things in the face-to-face mode, we can do things online, and then we have the option of the blended approach. I think that another thing that I see is mobility being defined differently this time around. So we've thought about mobility in moving from one institution to the other to participate and to learn from the other institution. Yes, beyond the pandemic, that would get back. But then we also have the option of being at one end and then through digital means, having some, being able to participate and learn from other institutions. So I think that really what this will do is to just open up more options for us, and we'll be able to get a lot more done now than we had in the past.
Yes, one of my experiences is that graduate students may never want to go back to normal life. The question I want to start with Professor Krieg is what is happening in Europe? Is it the same that people want to go back, or do they want a fully digitized teaching and learning? Professor Krieg.
I think if you see the graduate students, I think for them it's much simpler to learn digitally. The biggest advantage, the biggest problem is for the freshman students. When they come to the university, they have to learn how to study. And this is really difficult. What is missing at the moment for our first year students is a social integration. They come to Aachen and they feel somewhat lonely, since all the events usually, even the parties, do not exist at the moment. And so they feel alone, and we have to find methods how to engage students in small groups, that they can also have this part of social integration. For instance, I'm a mathematician and I have very, very nice formulas, but the students usually do not always understand the formula. And they think they are the only one who do not understand this. If you are in a lecture hall, they talk to the colleague next to them, and then they see this is a very, very normal problem. And we have to find ways how to talk to the students and to give them also the impression that this is quite normal, and that they interact in small groups such that they can also get the things I propose in the lecture. And this will be one of the biggest challenges in the future for digital learning, I think. And this is quite simpler for graduate students.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Hadj-Hamou, what are the experiences in the Middle East?
I mean, again, the Middle East has very, I mean, if we're talking about the Arab region, we're still talking about 22 countries with different, infrastructures, with different capabilities. So we have countries like the Gulf region, where I'm based, where there is a 90% plus internet penetration, where students, for many of them, are not struggling with bandwidth or internet connectivity. But we still have Arab states where there is an internet penetration of 23.4%, like Yemen, for instance, or 42% like Syria. And for those countries, it would be very challenging to actually move online. And therefore, you will find that there is a very big variation in the experience of moving online and the ability to basically deliver effective learning experiences. From a student perspective, many students in the undergraduate level are still wanting to actually go back to the traditional face-to-face mode because of the learning experience, because it's not just about the math and the science and whatever they're learning in the classroom, it's the overall learning experiences that many meet. You find that this is a bit varying for postgraduate students and for working students. There is a very high percentage of working students in this part of the world, and for these online learning continues to be convenient. So there are very different views. Another challenge that we cannot actually forget is that we have an issue across the Arab states about recognition of online learning. Most of the ministries of higher education, the external quality assurance agencies in the 22 Arab states do not recognize online learning or even blended learning with more than 25% online presence. So this is a big issue in terms of recognition, which will actually make students reluctant towards moving online.
Professor Amfo, would you add on to what Hadj-Hamou has said?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I mean, for us here and for all other institutions, there are different kinds of graduate students. And so we have graduate students for our professional programs, and most of these students fall into the category of working students. And so they have been very happy with our evening programs and weekend programs. And these students are certainly more than happy to continue with online education, because then they don't have to close work, try to get away from work early and drive through the traffic to come to campus for the programs. They can stay wherever they are in the country and get access to these programs. So that's a great thing for them. But there are also other students, there are research students who love to come back to campus, especially those who have to do laboratory work. They need to be here on the ground to get their experiments going. And the other thing that is also important is the support that the students have provided for each other throughout this period. And I believe that it has been easier because these students had already been in a face-to-face environment. And so they had already built a certain kind of relationship. And that would be the difficulty for first-year students, especially undergraduate students straight out of high school. They come fresh to higher education and they need the support of each other. And so for such students, I think it's great if there is the opportunity to offer some form of face-to-face interaction before we move on to the online mode. So a blended approach then works very well for them. So I think that depending on the kind of students that we have, the kind of program that they are pursuing, and their own level of preparedness and maturity, different things will work for different sets of students. So we shouldn't be looking at a one-size-fits-all program.
Thank you so much. I know Professor Krieg commented that there another comment from UK on this. Professor Morgan.
Yeah, I think there's nothing much to add. I think what's been interesting, just as an observation, is how many more graduate students or how many students who have taken an undergraduate are looking for postgraduate courses at the moment. You know, the economic impact of the pandemic in terms of student learning and wanting to engage in postgraduate programs is interesting. I would agree that I think once you've been through a first cycle, I think a second cycle is more easily engaged with if you're in a digital space. I still think the challenge for us as educators, though, is to ensure that there is a sense of community amongst those groups, even though they are at distance. And I think this transfers even on into PhD students, where it can be the most lonely of existence, but particularly at distance, it really does require very clear means of communication, very clear means of support, and ensuring that the learning outcomes are very well defined. I think that's the challenge for us, but I do think that we can offer things in small doses as well. That's the other point where we talked about micro-credentialing earlier. I think that's a really interesting angle where, again, in my area, I'm an economist. There are lots of students who go into professional economics roles who just need to upskill in certain areas. They don't want to do a whole master's program, but they do want to improve their econometric skills. Can they do that in an environment where they can take a chunk of learning online and not finish work or leave work? And I think that is something that we do need to explore.
Yes, I know Dr. Hadj-Hamou talked about infrastructure. Could you comment if there are other challenges in the region that require to be prioritized differently?
Is that me again? Is that right?
I know, I thought I said Hadj-Hamou.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Could you?
The sound is a bit not why I missed that.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I said you earlier talked about the differences in terms of infrastructure. Could you say a few things about other challenges you have other than infrastructure that needs to be prioritized?
I think that, you know, if we were looking at priorities will happen at 3 levels. At a macro level, you know, which is at a national level, at a meso level, which is more at the institutional level, and at a micro level, which is at the level of the program and the courses that we are offering. And I think that at the macro level is probably, you know, the most important bit of it, because that's where it all started. And in our part of the world, as I've mentioned, there might be the need for developing actually national strategies for higher education, which looks at how technology can be embraced. We still have issues with recognition of non-traditional forms of learning. So blended learning, hybrid learning, online learning are all things that are not yet recognized. You know, recognition of prior learning, these are all issues many universities face within the region. So that would be a first thing. The second element, obviously, as I've mentioned, is the improvement of the national IT infrastructure. And this is where the higher education sector will need to work across you know, sectors to basically overcome this issue. I also think that there is an issue of having to adapt external quality assurance mechanisms. Accreditation here plays a very important role. And those standards will need to actually be adapted to consider aspects of non-traditional forms of education. Always at the macro level, I think there need to be a greater level of engagement of different stakeholders and more autonomy for universities, because in some of the Arab countries, there is a high level of control, and universities, if they need to be agile and responsive, they will need to have autonomy. If it takes 18 months to get a program approved, then that's too late, you know, for the very dynamic market needs. At an institutional level, I would say, or at a meso level, I would say that institutions need to have really clear strategies for digital transformation that are rooted into their institutional strategic priorities. And basically, they will need to work on engaging their internal stakeholder. And I think that a lot of what we talked about in terms of, you know, at the meso level, in terms of, you know, engaging students, thinking out of the box in assessment, creating an engaging learning experience, are all things that will require careful consideration. But I think that these 3 levels are important to be considered.
Yes, Professor Nana, could you talk about the regional challenges? What we need to prioritize?
Right. So for us, the issue of IT infrastructure is important. Internet access nationwide. There are parts where this is very strong, but there are also many parts of the country or even within the region where there's a lack of internet access. And as you know, our students are all over the country and all over the region. And so it is important that as a nation, we fix that IT infrastructure. It's easier for the institutions to fix their own IT infrastructure needs. That's quite easy to do. but at the national level, that's something that we need to tackle quite seriously. The other thing has to do with regulation and accreditation. Yes, as Dr. Narimane mentioned, this is also an issue around here, the acceptability of online programs. Unfortunately, our National Council for Tertiary Education has taken the steps and is requiring that institutions provide inputs for assessments of their online programs. And currently at our institution, we are developing an online teaching and learning policy. So I think that these things are being fixed, and it's part of the recognition that we're going to have online education being with us for a very, very long time to come. And the other challenges has to do with skills development. Earlier on, there was a comment about us sort of migrating exactly the things that we are doing in the face-to-face mode online, but that's not how online teaching and learning works. Issues of delivery, issues of assessment, the credibility of our assessments, take-home examinations, and so on and so forth. Of course, I mean, institutions can acquire proctoring software in that regard, but also we need to retool ourselves. We need to learn the skills that make teaching and learning more effectively. And that's where I think that we can collaborate as institutions to share our skills and to retrain ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I could ask quickly also Professor Krieg and then Professor Morgan to talk about the challenges in Europe.
So at the moment, I think in Germany, it's no problem to get recognition for online learning. The accreditation system works out, and if you want to get credits from another university, at least theoretically, everything is fine. In practice, of course, there are problems, since you have to convince colleagues that it doesn't matter that this student did not take the lecture from himself, but from a different person. That might also be good. But I think there we have to convince, and things develop. And I think this is one of the outcomes of the pandemic, that we had that we get more acceptance also for other kinds of recognitions, that we can have online learning from different places, but we have to ensure that this person has the competencies. That means if you talk about exams, that this person really took the exam himself and not somebody else. That's, at least in Germany, a very big problem, at least in the beginning courses, not for the graduate students. And this will also be a problem in the future. And talking to our administration, to the ministry who finance all the work, the problem is that they have to accept that digital teaching needs more effort than the face-to-face teaching, since we are accustomed to face-to-face teaching for years, and this is new and things have to be improved. It is not the case that you prepare the material once and then you will use this material up to your retirement. And they have to accept that this requires work and costs some money. It's not a kind of saving money if you have digital teaching. And people have to understand that it works out this way. And the autonomy of universities is a big issue. For instance, during the pandemic, it was proved that the autonomy of the university was really helpful, since the universities developed strategies to overcome this and to help the students to get their degrees.
Professor Morgan, we are running out of time, but just one comment.
That's fine. No, I think the one thing I would say is that you know, digital isn't new for many people. I think that we sometimes we sort of implying that this is all very new. It's not. Lots of people have been doing lots of things in many ways. It's about how we do this in a consistent and at scale fashion. And I think that's the real challenge for us. And I think there are lots of the issues that colleagues have talked about will underpin how we do that systematically, rather than, you know, people who are doing it for their little module or their little course, rather than as a whole institution, or indeed a whole
Is there like one support that you know that UK would need?
One support the UK would need. Wow. I guess it's always the technology. I think in this area, it's getting something that's reliable and robust. And I think one of the challenges we found was people using technologies that would not scale up, that they would use for a group of students, but you couldn't use as an enterprise-wide system, partly because they fell foul of GDPR and things like that.
We are out of time, but I want Professor Nana just one support, and then Hadj-Hamou one, just less than a second. You can say that.
Appropriate technology gadgets for our students.
Thank you. And Hadj-Hamou?
Yes, I would say, you know, proper programs for upskilling faculty skills on an ongoing basis.
Program. And Professor Krieg, last comment.
So what we need is a good financial situation in order to improve the teaching in various ways.
I want to thank you so much, because I can see Anne just wanting me to stop here so that we move. Anne, over to you.
Thank you everyone for this great discussion. If you have some comments now, we would open the floor to the rest of the audience, and you can just join this discussion with us for a couple of minutes before we then go into smaller breakout sessions. So you can either use the hand raising tool for us to call on you, or you can add your questions in the chat. There was a question in the chat earlier. I don't know if this was already then talked about.
It was a comment. Yeah.
With a bit of a question in there, whether there will be a merging of universities or conversion of campuses into something else, because if you have large scale campuses and now they're moving into online, what happens? What's the effect on the actual campuses? So if somebody wants to respond to that, then please feel free.
I think there's already been some responses. It did indicate that the university campuses offer a range of activities, and I don't think these will go away that quickly and easily.
So I think at the moment we have more or less home office for everyone. And there are many office spaces which are not used at the moment. And we will hopefully come to certain regulations where we will use office space more efficiently. But of course, for the lab work, I think there is no way that we will use these things for other types of teaching. They are necessary, and also like in medicine, of course, you have to talk to real people when we talk about medicine. And so it will be different, but office space could be something which will be done in a different way in the future.
There might be one comment I can carry over from our session this morning, as we had participants from Australia, and they were talking about the cultural aspect, or they called it a cultural aspect, that online learning is not second-rate learning. But I guess in many cases, online learning is seen as second-rate learning. This is more probably a question. Is this correct? Have we to do something to make it equally relevant, equally valid than campus-based learning? Or is this really a cultural aspect in Australia, which is a country which is less densely populated than, for example, Germany? And are they probably further developed because they have refined their methodologies in online learning? So this was an aspect coming into play this morning.
I would think
I think that's an interesting perspective. I have thought that the questions relating to the acceptability of online programs has to do with issues of credibility and quality and a certain lack of standardization in many instances. And so that's what I see the issues to be from around here. But I think since the pandemic struck and we've all had to do more of these, we've also had to rethink these issues, and I can see efforts from all sides to try to resolve the issues of quality and credibility and so on. So I really haven't thought about the whole cultural aspect to that. But to link this up with the earlier discussion on campuses and so on, I think I'm a linguist, I'm a humanist, and I think that we shouldn't really think that we can go digital to a certain extent that we eliminate all the human factor. That simply isn't going to happen, at least from where I come from. We like the human interaction, and we're talking about vaccines now, and whenever there is the possibility, we like to bring in the human factor, the human interactions, which I think it's also critical to our training and development.
May I comment just on this last point, if we have time?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I think that, you know, over the years, there have been lots of meta studies that have been done on comparing the quality of traditional learning with face-to-face learning. And just like with face-to-face learning, there's good online learning experiences, and there are poorly designed online learning experiences. And one thing that we have to be cautious with when we're actually really, especially that cultural perception, when we're actually evaluating the impact of what we've done during the last fall and spring semester, is to distinguish between meaningful online learning experiences and emergency remote learning. And these are completely different things because the context is different. This is a reaction to a crisis. Very often institutions were not prepared. Instructors try to do their best into migrating online to ensure continuity. And that is very different from actually meaningful online experiences, which are well planned. They have the resources in place. They're thought of. They're part of the institutional strategy. So I think that we have to really be careful that when people are going to start evaluating what we've been doing the last couple of semesters, they might really get confused there. And there was a very interesting article published by Edukos a few months back that was really talking about those comparisons in terms of evaluating the quality. There are organizations like Quality Matters, for instance, that have developed quality indicators specifically to evaluate emergency remote teaching because they do understand that the context is different. And I just think that this is something that we'll have to take into consideration because there will be lots of cultural perceptions on the inferior quality of online learning because of what we've done during the COVID.
Yes, I think it's a good point to say that the emergency response is different from what needs to happen afterwards. I think that's something that we also widely found in the discussions that were happening in the past 8 months and also the data from the survey.